So we are going to continue our shift to a discussion of S5, and we have with us our legislative counsel, Ellen Tchaikovsky. And so we have taken a considerable amount of testimony on the bill, and we finished the walkthrough. And I think it would be, if members have questions about the bill or about testimony that you've heard, suggested edits that we've gotten along the way this week, now would be a great time to bring them up.
Have we gotten the language from Efficiency Vermont yet?
No. We got that yesterday. Yeah, we've got a walkthrough of their suggestions, but I don't know if we have the language.
Okay.
PUC brought language yesterday, but I think Efficiency Vermont still needs to send us there. Okay. Okay. The copy key. So maybe who sent it?
Dave Westman.
Dave Westman, did you get that, Kate? We're checking on that when they have it. Okay. Yeah.
I know that, thank you. I know a bunch of us got an email from a constituent in Burlington about the carbon intensity of biomass and not including solid fuels in carbon intensity scale. I've been asking around, learning more about that, whether or not it should be a concern, whether it made sense to insert a solid, liquid, or gaseous clean heat measure into that section, which is on page 22, carbon intensity of fuels. And I'm persuaded that we don't need to be concerned about it because we still need to meet our emissions reductions goals on an annual basis. And technical advisors suggest that the scalability of biomass is such that it isn't the same level of threat as liquid and gas heat measures. So I don't know if anybody else was wondering about that email thread.
I actually just had a conversation with Representative Spedman, with Representative Eldon, that I would like to have some testimony in here from people who have the knowledge about biomass, and I will be making some suggestions about that. But I think for purposes of thermal energy, as opposed to electric generation, which is a separate subject, I do think there's a very important place for it, actually, in terms of what's now called advanced wood heating, pellets in particular. So I think there are, and we have heard, about that heat pumps have, at least in current technology, have to limit certain limitations in terms of, they're not for every situation. So I'm having dealt with this issue in the previous committee that I served on and all of that. I'm pretty convinced that it is an important option that probably should have a little bit more mention in the bill, and that we should inform ourselves a little bit more about that. And I'll just say, in terms of biomass for electric generation, there are two existing plants that do that, but they that is not going to be an efficient use of biomass unless you use the waste heat which Burlington has been talking about for a while, and Reigate was considering, but nothing has happened. Reigate is not in a situation where a district heating system is possible, given that it's in the middle of nowhere.
Representative Clifford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just looking for an answer and from anybody in the document, the S5 document, on page 4, under definitions 8123, carbon intensity value is the amount of life cycle greenhouse gas emissions per unit of energy of fuel expressed in grams of carbon dioxide equivalent to per megajoule.
You don't know what that means?
I'm open.
Sounds like a shark movie.
Intensity value. Some
Try to give a explanation, or Ellen, you might be good at this by now.
Sure. I mean, I think the first few words are the most important. It's the amount of life cycle greenhouse gas emissions per unit. So it's trying to standardize how we measure across a bunch of different fuel types the amount of carbon emissions. So it's going to be a unit of measurement, basically. And we talk about it later, and it's 80 to 20. So it's just a scale. It's a roundish number, but it's going to be a unit of measurement of emissions. And it can be used for different fuel types. And so that's why there's all those other extra words addressing the different units of measurement.
It's like
Dirtier
I just hope
carbon intensity.
none of my constituents want me to go further on that. I'm going to call you if they do.
Well, I don't know. Perhaps Logan has more.
Like, we could give you an example.
Okay.
I personally could not provide an accurate one for you, but I could imagine one, which would be something like, so you burn wood in a fireplace to heat your home. It's going to have a really high ratio of greenhouse gas emissions per unit of heat, right?
Yeah.
But if you burn a much cleaner source of energy, it's going to have a smaller percentage of greenhouse gas emissions emitted per unit of heat energy produced.
Okay.
So it's just more efficient versus less efficient heating fuels.
And the life cycle piece is sort of like, so if you're thinking about natural gas that is obtained from like Texas or something, the life cycle would be from when they actually pull it out of the well and then they transfer it to wherever they treat the gas, and then the whatever is released through leaks as it comes through pipes. And then finally, when it's, gets to the Vermont home and it is burnt, that's the full life cycle, as opposed to, as opposed to just what is burnt in your house. So the full
Cradle to
life
grave.
cycle is from the, yes, exactly. Cradle to grave. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and the other example that's in this bill, later you establish sort of a baseline that number 2 heating fuel has a carbon intensity of 100. So if any biofuels are blended into that, the carbon intensity will go down because there will be less carbon emissions because a cleaner source has been blended into that fuel.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And what's the biofuel that would be blended into it?
There's a lot, and they do, their carbon intensity values do vary widely. They're not all created equal. I think some of the ones that are considered the cleanest are, for example, used cooking oil, particularly because they're being reused and repurposed. But there are different sources, so different plant fuels, plant types that can be turned into fuels like corn or soy.
Other questions?
Milfoil.
Milfoil? Wow, okay, maybe that's it.
I've got a milfoil idea for the Wednesday cabaret.
Representative Smith.
I don't have enough. I'm gonna think out loud for a second, but I won't.
Wise. That's wise.
Oh, really?
No, Well, good morning for all of
How are
us. It
you?
was not you. It wasn't personal to you,
No, that's okay. I do have a question.
Representative Smith.
You mentioned cooking oil and corn oil as a biofuel. If we start using more corn, people will be eating less corn because you can only grow so much in this country.
This is a very complicated topic that I'm
Yeah.
not the exact expert on. However, there's a significant amount of subsidies on corn in this country, and a significant amount is grown specifically for the production of biofuels. And so,
Interesting.
yes, so there's already a fair amount of our corn crops go to the production of fuels.
We could start eating
There's a
algae.
federal subsidy for that.
All right, other thoughts on testimony that we've heard this week or questions that you have outstanding? Topics you would see us cover. Representative Tory, then Stebbins. Logan.
I thought that the changes suggested by the PUC seemed like ones we should talk about.
Yeah, I think so. So I think that we will ask Ellen to work those into the next draft. Great. Representative Stebbins, then Logan, then Zachary.
I would love to spend some time looking at the dates, because that's been raised in a few different testimonies. And one of the ones that from the testimony we heard that particularly resonated with me was number 10 from Matt Coda, which was January for the fuel dealers. I don't know what they're doing.
Oh, yeah,
If they're
January,
just-
April.
If they're just registering, I think it's easy enough to fill out a registration form.
No, it
If
was
they're actually
paying.
doing
It was
stuff.
having to be trued up. And he was saying, can we true up later?
Yeah, I feel like those folks are really, they're answering no heat calls. And I think I'd like to look at the full date list.
Yeah. Right. And Ellen, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the suggested PUC edits, but they also included some suggested timeline stuff. So you brought up the timeline to us, and they also brought the timeline up to us. So I think we're hearing that we need to address timeline issues. So to the extent we can move forward on that, that would be great. You find the efficiency Vermont.
Yes, it's in our email, and
And is it posted, Kate? The efficiency Vermont? Yesterday. Great. Under
this, Dave Westman.
Dave Westman. So that code had 10 points.
Still not seeing it posted.
Yeah,
Thursday, March 30th.
We just look under Dave Westman, really. Should be able to. Damn.
I would like to take some more testimony on a potential study and specifically have Dave Westman in on that from Efficiency Vermont. And I'm not sure, perhaps Rich Cowart also from the Regulatory Assistance Project on those on an item.
Okay, and Rich has maybe done them?
I think in terms of, yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Dave Westman.
is subjected to them as well, or and has done.
Okay, great. Representative Clifford.
And requested to hear from a couple of people.
You should be on our Tuesday lineup.
Okay.
They should be on our Tuesday lineup.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so folks who've requested, we're trying to accommodate them. Have a number of them in on Tuesday.
So
What? People who've requested to testify. Representative Tory.
I was wondering if other people have any interest in kind of a higher level building electrification picture, maybe from a national organization. There's one I'm aware of called Rewiring America that could be useful for us just in terms of the big picture of where we want to go as we're getting all in the weeds. I just wondered if it would be helpful for people to get a little bit of time. It could even just be a webinar or something that we watch on our own time. something I feel like I'm missing right now.
I had an order, Logan and then Sadkowitz.
Thanks. Edits suggested by the Office of Racial Equity.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
I wanted to be sure that I've reviewed those and they look good.
Yeah, they've got some. We should include those also. Great. Representative Sadkowitz.
Okay, so I have a few things I'd like to learn more about. One is, I'd like to know how the large amounts of recently approved federal money sort of intersects with the goals of this bill. What will be if we were to have this bill go forward, what role would all this new money play? And how would it all kind of fit together? And then another question is, I'd like to know how this bill affects either positively or negatively low-income folks who rent. And I'd also like to know similarly how mobile home residents would be affected by this bill, either in a positive or negative way.
And we were going to hear from the capstones.
Yes.
We're trying to get some folks in who should help them.
Those are my questions at the moment.
Can I respond to one of the things?
Yeah.
So the PUC in the Senate recommended strengthening the default delivery agent so that it was having, and I think in this recommendation they did as well, so that more it was more default, and part of that being having a central body who could specifically be drawing down the federal funds in this sector. And they would the PUC would have close eye on that budget process and the process they were using to, and really working on drawing down those funds. So I think that there have been conversations that having the DDA be the central figure that's really sort of aggregating some of the different incentives to do this work and having sort of economies of scale that way is something they're envisioning with the default delivery agent and having them be the default. So more work is going to go to them. I think that was not my most eloquent answer, but
I got the idea.
No, that was good. Representative Tory.
Yeah, on the DDA, in my mind, it would be really effective if they were doing a lot of capacity building around workforce, because we really heard that so loudly from the fuel dealers now that they're not even well staffed up. So I'm just wondering, like, is that in the vision for the DDA yet? Or is it something that we would want to hear more about? How workforce could be in capacity building for the transition?
I think we heard that from Efficiency Vermont yesterday. And they were asking if we could utilize this system, if you could get credits for workforce development training.
How that would get valued?
Yeah.
Yeah, how would could it be valued in this? Yeah, okay. Recommendation 3, apparently. So we need to,
We have that.
we do, yeah. Under Dave Westman, the witness. Representative Stebbins.
Thanks. For Representative Sakowitz's comment about federal dollars, Joyce Manchester from JFO did give a presentation to Senate Natural Resources that had an overview of where some of the different dollars would be able to go, what was usable. So we would just ask JFO to come in for 15 minutes or something on that. But the other thing I just wanted to mention, the budget bill did have money in it for, I think it was like $180,000 or so for sustainable jobs fund to provide training to existing energy service businesses to help them make a shift. And then there was also funding in there for other climate workforce efforts. So I just want to highlight that there are initiatives underway.
There are, and I keep going back to, I'd like to know who's keeping track of them all. And today with TJ, of the slide that we got from them, I didn't get to ask because I had to leave, but was that representative of the universe of funding, or are there others? Do we know? How do we answer that question?
I do think that, so in the Senate, yes, they did hear from JFO, but I think they did also hear from DPS, who is keeping a close eye on all of the pots of money in this sphere. So you could also potentially hear from them. And I don't know if they'll be able to answer that question fully, but I do think they are.
They're the one closest.
Yeah.
I was one, I mean, I don't know, did you guys get
And
to
they
ask that
provided it.
question to them today?
They provided it.
Yeah, today, we got it today.
Yes.
Yeah, it's in their presentation from today. I just wasn't sure if, I was
Did
trying to,
not ask
I was
if that
trying to
was
limit
on.
questions, so I didn't
Yes.
ask a
Yeah.
question that I needed the answer to.
But that was only the list of federal funds, so that didn't include any state workforce development.
Yeah, so,
You could put the ask out though and see if they could come back.
yeah,
Or on the state funds.
maybe JFO also would. JFO could give us the state and maybe DPS is federal. Representative Smith.
Okay, do we know if the state of Vermont monies will be there when federal money runs out, once this is all, if and when it is all established, this bill, if the federal funding that's pushing it is no longer there, are we gonna have enough money to keep it going the way we want to keep it going?
So that is one of the central themes of this bill, is creating a marketplace that generates revenue to do this work. So that is the intent, is to create a stable funding source.
So this is where the extra dollars that, where fuels are gonna cost more money, additional taxes on fuels, is that gonna be the funding
No.
behind it?
So technically there are no taxes and no taxes being raised
Or fees?
and there aren't specifically any fees.
Okay,
It will be generated by the selling of the credits. Whatever price those are set at, that will generate the revenue.
we won't know how much a credit is gonna be until this bill is passed.
Yeah, until well after this bill is passed, yes.
Representative Morris and Baumgart's.
Oh, thank you. But that credit,
He was gonna talk.
it's a monetary value. Comes from somewhere, that monetary value.
Yep.
And it's going to be price per gallon or something similar.
Yes, it probably will trickle down, but I do just want to make clear that this bill doesn't
Correct.
establish a funding source in the mechanism of a tax or a fee, but it's creating a market where things can be sold and bought to generate revenue. And yes, there potentially that will lead to costs on the price of fuel.
And with that said, do we, and I've heard through a couple of the forums and climate action meetings that 1 out of 5 dealers in Vermont just deliver home heating fuel as opposed to doing installations for alternatives. We have, is there, we don't have an accurate number of actually how many that is and how many people they employ.
I don't have that.
I'm sure they register now.
In a map, yes.
Right.
Yeah. Matt Coda provided that information. I want to say 100. That's the number I heard.
May I ask another question?
But after Representative Baumgart's.
All right.
Some of them can't.
So we're just sort of sitting here and talking, thinking about this. When I know there's some work being done around workforce, developing workforce. I'm sitting here wondering whether whatever we're doing, we need to do times 10. Or I don't know this, but I'm wondering, are we just kind of nibbling around the edges of that issue? Despite all the work that I know has been done by way of laying groundwork. And if the numbers that I've heard are correct, that we need another 6,000 people doing weatherization and really getting trained to do installation for heat pumps. I don't know if I don't know what the right number is, and it may be unknowable actually, but I am wondering whether, like, for instance, for those of you who have been around this longer than I have, do we believe this?
No.
That we're going to hit those numbers for the heat pump forecast. So I don't know. That's a fundamental question I've been sitting here thinking about for the last couple of days. Is are we really doing what we really need to do to develop the workforce? Is that actually almost the most important thing we need to do?
Yeah.
Representative Sibilia, then
So-
Logan, was your question related to workforce?
Right along with what stuff that Representative Bongard was just talking about.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I don't think we've done a lot of in-depth discussion about this here in the committee yet, about the potential study, but who was it yesterday? It was Dave Westman started talking about the potential study and how you would do that. And what that does is it helps us set, so we've got our goals and statute, and then we're looking at, okay, now what is possible based on, I think he said, you measure what needs to be done, then you measure if everything was free, what would be the percentage of people that would participate, which still wouldn't be 100%. Then take it another level. What do we have for work? What are the limiting factors? What's the workforce situation? What are supply chain issues? What's happening with fuel prices? All of those things. And then we end up with something that looks more likely, that is achievable, reasonable.
I would like to add to what.
So it helps us to adjust to the workforce that we have while we're building workforce.
Yeah, but while Representative Sibilia is talking about the potential study, can you just help us understand how you see the potential study informing S5 and how it goes forward? How would it get worked in?
So it is in here right now. I'm not sure what section it's in here, and it's pretty small. What we need to do, I believe, is put some parameters around it. There's been a potential study is not a new concept. The Regulatory Assistance Project, for instance, has done some critiquing of successful and less
Advisory group?
successful.
Yeah, where's?
It's on
What
page
section?
18.
8129 on page 29. Would that be it?
No, on
18.
On 18?
So right now, this has the Department of Public Service conducting this this potential study, looking at what's possible. So we need to give them a little bit more information about what factors we'd like them to consider. And that's why I've asked for folks who have either been subjected to potential studies or who have had to critique them or so am I answering your question, Madam Chair?
Well, I'm wondering what you're kind of interested in would be, how would you need to augment it? What's not here that we need, or like I have a note here, said needs a deadline. So that's another thing we need to work into the timeline. I think that was from you walking us through it. So
At a minimum.
what else does the potential study, if we want to kind of integrate it into informing this, creation of this program, what else do we need to do?
Well, we may want to give the administration clear parameters about what we want them to consider when they're assessing what the potential is. So things and what we don't necessarily want them to consider when we're assessing what the parameters are. Timeline, et cetera. Kate, just phone a friend.
Okay, I was just looking. All right, Representative Smith has been patient.
Thank you.
Logan.
It's kind of like what Representative Bongard was saying. It's kind of like building a house. You buy all the materials and you can't find anybody to build it. So does it make any sense to even pursue S5 before we know if we got the workforce to make it work? If you don't have the workforce, S5 can sit right up on that wall forever.
Potential study will scale. Brian.
Yeah,
It will
Representative
scale.
Logan,
Sorry.
and then Pat.
Well, I'd say, and I'm concerned with the workforce considerations too, but if there isn't a market for something, then there's no point in having a workforce. You need both. You need to do both. You need to be prepared for the market by preparing a workforce, and then the workforce will naturally grow and it'll scale up naturally as word gets out about this new profession and people become more accustomed to it. But you do have to give it a little kick and a little certainty by setting the market conditions. And so along those lines, I I'm looking at this, the recommendations from Efficiency Vermont, the recommendation number 3 to support all market activities that result in clean heat measures. This is an interesting place to put this into the bill in section 8127 on credit ownership. They recommend adding a clause to 8127B, credit ownership. In the page 20, thank you.
Oh, boy.
Bless you. So tradable under section 8127, tradable clean heat credits, subsection B, credit ownership, the commission in consultation with the tag shall establish a standard methodology for determining what party or parties shall be the initial owner. And they strike initial, the owner of a clean heat credit upon its creation, comma, including a representative value for the provision of all components of current and future programs to include but not be limited to financial incentives, workforce development, market uplift, and training. So in other words, considering the fact that installation or delivery of a clean heat measure also requires all of these other pieces, the financial incentives, the workforce development, market uplift, and training. But I, for the life of me, cannot understand how this would work. I can't imagine it. And I feel like I need somebody to explain it to me, but then that would be the purpose of the tag. The tag would need to figure out how to include those
And
components.
Mr. 3 too, like you heard.
Right.
How does that?
Yeah, but I think it's smart because like you said, it basically provides a way for funding the conditions that will create a successful market.
Representative Pat.
Getting back to what we were talking about, sort of the obstacles, like whether or not there's going to be workforce or those kind of questions. I think the bill, as the Senate passed, does put this will not in any event be implemented until at least 2 years from now after the study is done. And I think we can add language around the study that I think beyond what it says now, that specifies that we want analysis of whether it's realistic and what time frame, including issues such as is there sufficient workforce and stuff like that. That should be part of the study. The study may say it will take some time before the workforce develops sufficient to be fully functioning in what you want to do, or may not. I don't know, but that should be one of the things that we ask for in the analysis, as well as any other kind of obstacles. It already says that it's necessary that they give the cost impact of it, and what this might or might not do to the cost of a gallon of fuel.
Representative Stebbins.
So from this morning's presentation, this chart here where it went 23, 24, 25, 26, up, and then it stops. I mean, I interpret this as these are all of the ARPA dollars and, the IRA dollars. This is what we've been doing. And then there's this stop. And so, when I was listening to their testimony and there was the statement of like the gap, that to me is sort of going to your point. We're building up workforce in 23, 24, 25, 26. And then there's this drop without federal input. And that's where I sort of see this market approach helping to keep that going.
Filling
going.
in the difference, sure, that's actually great. Yeah, and so the 6,000 number,
Sure.
workers that we were told we would need to do this work, and I guess I think like, does that mean if we were gonna do it all today, we would need 6,000, or is there is there a timeframe put to that? Yeah, Representative Williams.
So what Secretary Moore has presented to us and is being widely shared is looking at the goals that we have in the Global Warming Solutions Act, the 2030 goal, and what it would take for us to hit the 2030 goal for emissions reductions. So what are the measures? How many people will we need? And then she's transferred the
I
cost.
think that's where the 6,000 came in.
It is. Yes, it is. And so, Madam Chair, you asked before about how does this potential study help us? This potential study says, okay, now let's look at what's actually possible. And, I like to be really clear that, when we look at what's actually possible, we will know that 7 cents is not correct. We may still not know what is correct, but that 70 cents presumes that we're doing all of these measures, that we can do all of these measures by 2030. The potential study will help us understand what in fact we can do. And as resources are changing, as our workforce is building, that will increase. As our supply chains loosen up, that will increase. So I think that 6,000, it's good for us to understand, but also I think we have mechanisms to help us scale to what is possible.
And we were reminded today that the Global Warming Solutions Act is not at any cost.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
It has to be reasonable and doable.
That's right.
Does it make sense am I the only one that thinks I need to know what a credit is worth before we pass a bill?
You will.
You won't know how much a credit is worth until after the bill is.
Well, after the market.
But
is
also the
created.
markets.
It's going to keep changing.
Yes.
But do you know how much a renewable energy credit is worth?
I don't even know how much room you need to put a cubic ton of carbon.
How much is your heating oil going to be in 3 years?
It could go down if we start drilling.
Might go up.
It could go up. Could go in any direction.
There's a lot of this, that's volatile and unpredictable that we live with today. It's built into the default because people need to heat their houses. Representative Logan.
Just going back to the Efficiency Vermont recommended edits. They have other recommendations that are around timelines, and then to allow the potential study to temporarily modify the compliance obligation and change the period for any adjustments based on the potential study to be up to 36 months rather than 18 months.
That piece we heard from the PUC, that increase from 18 to 30.
Yeah, we heard
30.
from
Okay.
both of them. I think
Yes.
they agreed.
Yeah, they did agree. And also to take market conditions into consideration. And also to include the quantity of credits generated in the triannual proceedings where they set credit costs and the quantity of credits to be generated. Anyway, all of their recommendations seem sound.
Right. Representative Sibilia.
Madam Chair, if we're still talking about testimony, I think Representative Stebbins talked about the dates. I think it would be good for us to have another kind of walkthrough with Budget Council on the dates. It'd also be helpful just to understand, as part of those dates, the orders and just the different actions the PUC is taking as a part of that.
Add into the timeline. Yes. Okay. All right. Representative Torn.
Last thing, this rewiring America idea that I had, I'm gonna see if there is a specific workforce piece to that.
That'd be great.
Maybe that could be helpful. But the other thought I had was something that was mentioned by DPS today about public engagement and their concerns around that. And I kind of wanted to, I think there was an allusion to the PUC kind of mixed bag on public engagement. So maybe that's another area that we could get some insight into. I don't know if anyone else is curious about that.
Yeah.
We've been getting public engagement, but that's not productive.
Abelia and then
But
Seth.
how they get.
Yeah, I mean, I would say we have been getting a lot of public engagement. There's been a number of elections that have occurred since the Global Warming Solutions Act also, which is, this is in response to. But in, it was H715, we did have other public engagement measures in there that were pretty,
Oh, in last year's
they
version.
were pretty well.
Yeah, this year's version is different.
Oh,
Yes.
well, I Representative.
But I would say that the DP, so we heard from, Secretary Moore and the department are both engaging right now in very robust processes, and they will be over the next year, which presumably is going to feed into this work. So, I mean, I think Vermont is having an extremely healthy discussion, extremely
Heated.
intense.
Engaged.
Engaged.
Well, gee,
That's the right word.
Unintended.
yeah, clean heat,
Discussion about.
Clean and heated.
clean heated discussion.
The PUC. That's the part.
It does come up. It does come up.
I see. The public process.
Yes, public process.
That's what I'm
There
saying.
were questions about the PUC process being different people having different experiences with how accessible they find it. Representative Stebbins and then Logan.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So we also heard this morning that Public Service Department or ANR, the analysis is there's going to be a draft in April, May-ish, and they will be done in June. And then the Department of Public Service is doing this sort of large public process for the next comprehensive energy plan. And I guess I just see those as what you were saying, Representative Sibilia. I see them more as, I see those as complementary. And I guess really hearing that people said, don't make this more challenging or more complex, hearing that, one of the things that maybe if we go through another walkthrough at some point, does there need to be more direction to take some of the feedback from the comprehensive energy plan public process? And, you know, how do we, because it also doesn't make sense to do multiple public processes. I mean, how many times does the public want to come out to hear about Vermont's energy policy? Like, it makes sense to leverage that, in my mind, with this.
Especially when you're using facilitator.
Well, that's my question is that, those were the recommendations from the Office of Racial Equity, is that they hire a facilitator for the public outreach for S5. Is that the process that will be used for the consolidated energy plan public engagement process? Because that I think that's where it would get tricky. Like, we're going to improve language in the bill based on the Office of Racial Equity's recommendations on how to conduct the outreach more effectively and then in a more inclusive way. And then that wouldn't impact the.
Well, there would still be outreach in this process here, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like in the past, and I don't know if this is how the Public Service Department is doing it this round, but in the past, for comprehensive energy plans or for different types of efforts like that, you know, they've set up like 6 meetings throughout the state, and they'll go to like St. Johnsbury or Brattleboro, and mean, I could imagine there could be some way to balance the two and work them together
Mhm.
while not also asking everyone that's already been tasked 18 times to 18 different committees in the
Yeah.
racial justice group to show up.
Definitely heard that feedback.
Mhm.
Representatives.
Yeah, I just want to be clear because I was so A&R is running an analysis. They're not running a public process. And then it's
Department
the
is running.
department that's running a public process.
Thank you. I thought I missed something. Did you have one more hand up?
I guess so. May I?
You may.
Thank you. Representative Logan just talked about racial equity. I don't mean to sound unknowledgeable of this, but what does that have to do with a clean heat standard? I don't know. And I've been wanting to ask that question for quite a while.
Sure. Well, I mean, we could take further testimony if you really want to get into the nitty gritty, but if you look back at the Energy Action Network's presentation, I believe, they do a demographic analysis and demonstrate that there are different social and economic groups that have a higher energy burden, meaning that they pay more of a percentage per dollar of their household income for heating their
Why?
home.
Why?
It's a great question. There's not a short answer. And that's why people use the term historically marginalized, that groups who have been treated differently socially and economically in the past continue to have lingering economic differences between, say, like white middle class folks have more wealth than Black middle class folks in the United States on average. Same thing with lower income white folks have an average of $109,000 of wealth in their household, whereas lower income Black folks in America have negative $9,000 of wealth in their household. So there's just lingering impacts so that.
And that's probably a tough thing to figure out in Vermont. I think, and I'm guessing on the percentages, 3% African-American families in Vermont and 4% or 5% Latino. So, and they all, 90% of them concentrate on a city somewhere to live.
And that's one of the reasons we have an Office of Racial Equity, is to help provide the data that helps us understand inequity in Vermont. And so they're a super helpful resource in terms of, facts,
Okay.
data.
All right. That's enlightened me. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, members, thank you for this discussion. I think where we're going to head from here is to ask Ellen to integrate many of the suggested changes that we've heard. I also recommend that you all revisit them, and when we do the walkthrough, make sure you're tracking the ones you're interested in. And so at Wednesday of next week, I think we'll be looking at another draft of this. And always feel free to send us ideas for witnesses you want to hear from. And Laura has obviously been integral to helping do this and make sure we're hearing from the right people. So send it to both of us. And that's that. I think this was a great week. Thanks. It was so long. I hope everyone can take time this weekend to restore. And if anyone has inspiration on the committee dinner idea, also send me their thoughts on that. Make time for a little